Gottlieb. I received my bachelor's in physics from MIT in '67, and I immediately went into a PhD program at UC San Diego that was going to last 4 years, and I lasted 2 years because it seemed more important to try to end the Vietnam War in 1969. So I left school in '69 and put the physics on the sort of mental shelf for a good number of years until I realized that it was going to come in handy in trying to understand the material I'm going to offer you tonight. I had a transformative experience in 1974 in a car out in the middle of nowhere, and I was scared to death about running out of gas. And in '74, I didn't have any cell phone or credit card or anything like that. All I had was cash, and I'm counting the miles per gallon and the miles to go, and it's not adding up, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And so I, never having prayed before, I asked for help right out loud because I was scared to death, and I heard a voice. And the voice told me everything would be okay, which it was. And for about 50 or 60 miles, the car didn't use any gas, and I couldn't explain that. The only way I could explain it is that the universe holds us to a set of laws, except not always, especially when it wants to make a point. And it made that point loud and clear to me. So in the last 51 years, I've been working on coming up with an understanding of the world and of a human being that would make sense in that context, and I'm going to present that information to you tonight and the next 3 sessions. Any questions so far? Okay, so exploring our culture's profound illusions. So there are 3 key ideas here: culture, profound, and illusion. So a good question would be, what is a culture? And what is our culture? What does it entail? And another question would be, what is an illusion? And then if you put them together with the word profound, what would make an illusion profound? So there are simple illusions, which I'll show you, and then there are more complex illusions, and then there are really profound ones. And that's where we're headed for tonight. So here's my planned agenda. Tonight we're going to explore illusion and what is a cultural illusion. And then next week we're going to talk about common sense. What is it? How do we have it? Do we have it? And does it serve us? And then on the 3rd Tuesday we'll do what is spirituality? And does it make sense to talk about the spirituality of physics? I think it does, and I think I can show you why I think that. And then on the 4th night, we'll try and pull it all together and talk about a new way of thinking about the world and about ourselves and the illusions and strategies for living that are revealed by that new view. So, for the most part, we don't realize that we have a view of the world and of what a human being is. We just get up in the morning and we act in the world. We don't realize that we have a worldview or something that allows us to make sense of the sensory input that comes into us. And I found that a good way to discover that we have a view of the world and what that view is to explore another one. And then you can compare them. Then you can see that it is possible to look at the world and at yourself from a different place than you've ever looked at it before. Probably. There may be 1 or 2 of you in this room that are already familiar with another way of doing that. So it's possible that these 4 sessions will bleed into one another, especially if somebody joins us next week, which they're welcome to do. So I want to give you some suggestions for getting the most out of this workshop. Leave what you already know at the door. Because if you examine what I'm going to present to you, what I'm going to offer you through the lens of what you already know, you may very well not see what I'm trying to present to you. And I want you to know that I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm going to show you a different view of the world and of yourself than you've been trained by your culture to use. But I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's better than the one you got already. But if you could leave it at what you have at the door, I think it'll be easier for you to grasp another view. And then it'll be up to you to decide what's right for you. Whether you want to reject what I'm telling you, which is fine, showing you, and go back to what you're comfortable with, or whether you want to try it out. Basically, I was forced to try it out by the experience that I just told you about, and I discovered that it works pretty well for me. So make an effort to see life from a very different perspective, and it will require some effort on your part. That's why I called it a workshop. It's not just something to sit there and enjoy on the screen. I want you to do a little work, and I'll show you what the work is. And don't judge this different perspective until you see it clearly. Once you see it clearly, once you say, okay, I see what you're getting at, I see what it looks like, and this is what I think about that, and that'll be fine. So, I remember driving through RVR and seeing that there were some empty lots, and on some of those lots there were viewing platforms. Here's a really high-end one that I found somewhere. But the point is, the purpose of it is to show you that if you decide to build your house, this is what it's going to look like from various windows. Mm-hmm. And that may help you decide if you want to build a house or not. That's what I'm up to, is I'm going to build a viewing platform for you and invite you up there with me so you can see what it looks like if you were to adopt this other worldview as one that serves you. Okay, let's get started. Not every human culture sees life the same way. A good example would be, you've probably heard about Chief Seattle, who said, you guys are talking about buying and selling land. We don't think in those terms. We are of the land. The land is of us. So it was a very different way of looking at life and at the world. So let's see. Seeing a new perspective on life requires getting clear about the current one, and that's what we're going to work on. And that requires an unusual level of focus from us. That's where the effort comes in. You have to focus on the ideas that I'll present to you tonight so that you can get a grasp of what is my worldview? How do I look at the world? And where did that view come from? And have I ever questioned it? In most cases, the answer to that question is no. I hadn't considered it. I wasn't aware that I had a view of the world before 1974. So we're going to define some terms here. And to understand a culture, we have to talk about beliefs. So you could say, I believe in an afterlife, or I believe in reincarnation. Or you could say, that's all bunk. If I don't see it, it's not real. Could be either of those or something in between. You could say life is hard. You could say life's a dream, row your boat gently down the stream kind of thing. And you can probably see how any of those beliefs would shape the way you understand life. If you believe in an afterlife, for example, or reincarnation, as I have come to do, the time we spend on Earth takes on a different feel. It takes on the feel of exploration and hopefully excitement and joy, as opposed to, well, here I am, and this is all there is, and why should I care, kind of thing. So what's a belief? So I looked it up, and there are different definitions of belief, but the one I like is a belief is an interpretation of reality that we take for granted. So our parents told us, as they taught us language, they were describing the world to us. They were describing how it works. They were describing what you have to do and what you probably shouldn't do. And in that process of learning language, We learned about the world. We learned about how it worked. So an interpretation is a particular explanation, rendition, or version of some original content, something that's just the way it is. So most of us think that the world, and you can talk about the world as the world that you woke up to this morning here in Carbondale or wherever you woke up, or you can talk about the world as the planet, or you can talk about the world as the universe. It doesn't matter for the purpose of this discussion, but it is what I call an is. In other words, in our culture, we're trained to think of the world is permanent and we come and go. We enter the world, we leave the world, we see people doing that all the time. That's one of the fundamental assumptions of the way our culture has trained us to look at our relationship to the world. It's permanent and we're transients. So we always assume that there's something that is independent of our interpretations, right? That is independent of our description of it. So if you want to describe the world, you could do it in terms of politics, you could do it in terms of economics, you could do it in terms of cosmology. In other words, understanding that 13.8 billion years ago there was a explosion, something exploded, and what we see now is the result of almost 14 billion years of expansion. That's something that physicists talk about. It's called cosmology. And that simply, in our culture, that simply is the way it is. And I call that an is. So the world is an is. And most of us put interpretation and reality in different categories. So these are philosophical categories. You know, reality is just what it is, and interpretation is associated with the meaning of what is. For example, what is the meaning of that thing over there that looks like a tiger? You know, that's where we come from in terms of human evolution. We have to know, what does that thing mean? So beliefs shape how we perceive the world, and illusions can shape our beliefs. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Our brains interpret sensory signals, often fooling us into believing that something that's not real. And I'll see if I can show you that. And challenging our assumptions can reveal which of our beliefs are illusions. And most people don't do that. And I honor you for being in this room and working with me to see if we can shine some light on that and see which of our beliefs are illusions. So let's talk about illusions. Here's a simple one. It's a mirage. And you've probably all seen that. You know, you're driving along the highway and it looks like there's a big puddle there, right? Now you can dispel that illusion pretty simply. Just keep driving. It'll clear up. You'll see that it's just the way light bounces off the pavement. But what's really going on here? The light that bounces off the pavement and enters your eye fools your brain into creating a picture of a puddle. So the sensory input into your brain through your visual system activates your brain the same way the light bouncing off a puddle would. So it looks like a puddle. And if you weren't aware that that was a mirage, I guess you could slam on the brakes. So it would affect your experience in your daily life. That illusion might affect your experience in your daily life. Probably not, but it might. So your brain is interpreting the sensory information incorrectly or inaccurately. In reality, there is no puddle. Now, I promise you we talk about our culture's illusions, and let's get our feet wet in that regard. Let's test that idea that I brought up earlier, that reality and our interpretations are independent of one another. In other words, reality is just the way it is. It's an is. The world's an is. and we can interpret what we see however we have been trained to interpret it. So let's look at that example using vision, using our sense of vision. So this is the physics of sight, right? You have a light source, you have an object, which we assume is out there somewhere, and we're told that the light bounces off the object and enters our eye. So there's an observer, an object, and a light source. The light source could be the sun, could be incandescent bulb or an LED, and we all take as real that the object in this graphic is out there as it is. Whatever it is, it's out there as it is. Now let's talk about the observer. So here's the physiology of sight. The input refers to the light entering the eye, which is then converted into neural signals that travel via the optic nerve to the occipital lobe of the brain, where visual information is processed and interpreted. Processed and interpreted means that the brain somehow makes a picture out of this visual information. So look at whatever you want to look at. You can look at the screen, you can look at me, you can look at something else in the room. And understand, or not understand, entertain the idea that light is entering your eye and it's producing electrical signals in your optic nerve, and those electrical signals are transmitted to the brain, and the brain makes a picture. So you're making a picture out of what? Out of sensory input, out of electrical signals. Your television does the same thing. If you take a cable and attach it to the back of your TV, and you get a picture on the TV, now you take the cable and you look at it. Is there a picture in the cable? No, there's just electricity. Same thing in your optic nerve. That picture is all you have. You assume that there's a world out there that your picture represents. But you know what? There's no way to prove that. There's no way to get outside of that whole thing. The world, the light, the object, your eye, your brain, all that. You can't get outside of that to test that idea. We all do that. That picture is all we have. Now let's sit with that assertion for a moment. That picture is all we have. But we all know there's a reality out there that's independent of our pictures of it, right? We all know that. That's just common sense. Of course, there was a time when common sense told people that the world was flat. And there was a time when common sense told people that everything in the night sky went around the earth. You all familiar with that? That was common sense. Everybody knew that. Nobody thought about that. Well, maybe some professors or whatever they were called back in the day thought about that and explained that. But people just knew that. It was where they came from. It was part of their worldview. And our worldview has a component called, there's a world out there that the pictures that are being created in my brain are a representation of. You know, it used to be in the early days of television, like black and white, which I remember, maybe some of you do, but you have to be a certain age to remember that. The television was about having something that you pointed a camera at, right? There was a source, there was an independent thing that was being encoded into electrical data that could then be sent over the airwaves, and later through the cable, and reconstituted in the TV. Nowadays, you can have stuff on your TV screen that has no basis in reality, right? We all see it. We all have watched those animated movies, computer-generated images that have no basis in reality. So I'd like you to sit with the possibility that the pictures in your brain are all you have, and you'll never have access to anything that they might be pictures of. We're simply not equipped to do that. Our senses are not equipped to discover what's really out there, or what out there even is. Sit with that during the rest of this and see if you can make sense of that. Cultural illusions are much harder to debunk than that mirage I showed you. You know, with the mirage, you just get closer and the puddle goes away. But a cultural illusion, let's posit the possibility that the fact that there is no world out there that your brain is making pictures of is a cultural illusion. If that were an illusion, it would be a profound illusion, because it would underlie all of your relationship to the world. And we'll look at that as we go along. So I found this great slide. This is a cultural illusion. Pardon me. This is a cultural illusion, one that held sway several centuries ago. Everybody knew that the earth was flat and had an edge you could fall off of. But we, with our science and technology, know better, right? We're not under the sway of any cultural illusions. Well, let me read you a parable. It will take me a few minutes to read this. That may illustrate how hard cultural illusions can be to identify as illusions. So this is the parable of the fish. And some of you may have heard this, or may have heard it in one form or another. Imagine, if you will, that each of us is a newborn fish. Right? You're a newborn fish. In the few days since we were born, we've cautiously swum about some, but now Mom has gathered us together to teach us about our world. She points out rocks, and that some good things to eat might be found around them. She tells us about the sand, and that there are some creatures that look like sand, but might want to sting us. She lets us know about what's good to eat and what might want to eat us, and eventually we come to feel as if we have this fish thing wired. But there's something that she doesn't tell us about, and that thing is water. Why doesn't she tell us about the water? She doesn't know about water. She doesn't know about water because water is all she's ever known. Now think about that. If you're immersed in water and you've never been out of the water, it's all you know. You don't distinguish it. You don't distinguish it from everything else, from the background. But imagine that one day something happens to you that takes you out of your well-understood reality. In that case, it comes in the form of feeling something sharp and foreign in your mouth. You're jerked around and pulled upwards, and suddenly you cross some sort of boundary and you can't breathe. You've been caught. Fortunately for you, you're in a catch and release area and you're gently put back where you belong. And now you know about the existence of water. You know about water by experiencing what we might call not water, so that you can now distinguish water from everything else. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. For us humans, the water in this parable doesn't represent a physical thing. Instead, it takes the form of an explanation of what we see and hear. It is a conventional understanding we have of the world and our place in it. However, like the fish in our parable, we look through and not at this understanding, or we look from it. It's transparent, actually translucent, like the water the fish swims in. We never think about our idea of the world, and for the most part, we're not even aware that we have one, because it's all we know. And we're going to try to get at that worldview that we never see, and probably nobody's ever pointed it out to you. I had it shoved in my face once about 50 years ago, and I couldn't not see that. So, this doesn't seem like a good idea, right? She's got a virtual headset on and she's riding a bike. However, she could take off that headset and discover what's really out there, right? We can't do that. We can't take our virtual headset off. All we have is a machine, your brain, that's creating images. We don't know what's actually out there or if there is an out there. Our perceptions act like a lifelong virtual reality headset. Unlike the case of a virtual reality headset, we cannot remove it to verify objective reality, if such a thing exists. We assume the world exists independent of ourselves, but the independence of the world is just that. It's an assumption, and you can't prove or disprove it. This is a fundamental cultural illusion that there exists a world out there that is what it is. And if you could just take that headset off, you could see what it is. So I spent years studying quantum physics. And quantum physics has been an incredibly powerful and effective way of understanding the world, of making sense of the world. The cell phone you have wouldn't be possible without quantum physics. GPS, whole bunch of things, everything that's got a transistor in it or anything that's got a chip in it would not be possible without quantum physics. But nobody understands what it means to a human being, because it tells us that the world doesn't exist as an is. It doesn't exist in a particular configuration until it's observed. And the most prevalent explanation of that, which is called the Copenhagen interpretation, says, just shut up and calculate. And when they shut up and calculate, it works great. You can design cell phones and GPS and all kinds of other stuff using it. But what it says about us human beings is almost incomprehensible, at least from our culturally mandated point of view. And we'll get into some more of that. So it's hard to see ourselves. To help us, we have fiction and nonfiction. But even nonfiction, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's not just the facts. Brings to mind Dragnet, if anybody's old enough to remember that. Just the facts, ma'am. Yeah. Nonfiction is not just the facts. You won't find just the facts anywhere. You'll find facts plus interpretation. And as we've seen, history can be rewritten to emphasize and support a particular agenda. Our stories shape our worldview and identity. The cultural water that we are immersed in, that we've never been outside of, defines who we believe we are. See, if all we have is our stories and interpretations, then what we call the world is just reflecting our own beliefs and assumptions. So let's think about that for a minute. If it turned out that there was no objective reality, like a world that is the way we observe it to be, adjusting for poor eyesight and that sort of thing. If there is no objective reality, that the pictures in your mind, in your brain, are representing, and if all you have is that description, that the story you've created about what the world is and how it works, then what we call the world is just reflecting our own beliefs and assumptions. That's all we have to build our story out of. So the world is a mirror. What you call the world is a mirror. It reflects your assumptions, your beliefs, your story about yourself and about the world. And there's no way to get outside of that to verify that objectively. So, what I've been developing for these last 50 years is something I call the seer's explanation. That was the title of my first book, which came out in 2014, I believe. And in that title, the word seer doesn't imply seeing visions or seeing auras or seeing anything else of a spiritualistic nature. It just means somebody who comes to a point where they say, oh, I see. That's what I mean by seer in that seer's explanation. So we're going to see if we can build a new worldview so that we can compare it to the one we already have. The seer's explanation is an alternative worldview that recognizes perception as the foundation of reality. So if you go to a physics class, or if you did back when I did, physics talked about the building blocks of reality were like atoms, matter, energy, forces like gravity and magnetism and electrical attraction, repulsion. This other worldview that I'm presenting you tonight holds that perception is the foundation of reality. And the implication there is that instead of the world being a container in which we live our lives, which is our cultural background, our awareness, our consciousness is the container in which the world shows up. That's forced on you if you accept the premise that all you have is your pictures in your brain. It sees human beings as participants in creating reality, not just observing it. Human beings create reality? Really? Remember, perception is electrical data interpreted by the brain. We don't see the world directly. We see our brain's construction, the pictures it creates. And language reinforces shared descriptions of the world, not the world itself, whatever that might be. As humans, we cannot access the world directly because our descriptions stand in between. The world will always be unknowable and unfathomable. If any of you ever read Castaneda in the old days, Carlos Castaneda, that was a word that Don Juan used, unfathomable. In other words, we're not equipped to understand what the world is. We're only equipped to understand how we interact with it. The way the world generates impulses that our brains turn into pictures. Of course, the kicker is that the brain is also part of that. The brain is also part of that picture in your head, in your brain. That's interesting. The brain is part of the picture in the brain. So, if human beings create reality, then what's perception? Ordinarily, perception is defined as our ability to see what's out there, to hear what's out there, taste, touch, and smell. Perception is usually defined as the result of using your five senses to inquire about the world. But here we're talking about creating the world as a picture in your brain. So we might have to redefine the word perception. My suggestion is perception is the organizing and interpreting of raw data to create the world that we experience. So quantum physics tells us the world exists in something called a superposition, which is simply infinite possibilities, some of which are more probable than others. It's called a probabilistic world or a probabilistic universe. That's what quantum mechanics leaves you with, like it dumps that in your lap and sort of walks away. And somehow, out of that plethora or infinitude of possible configurations of the world, we identify one. And even more incredible is that we can all agree on it, certain aspects of it anyway. And we have a language that allows us, or perhaps several languages that allow us to talk about it, to talk about how our perceptions are the same. Except Kay and I have discovered that her blue is sometimes my green. So perceptions vary. The processing of raw data can be processor specific. So then we have in physics, we have something called the observer effect. And I have a platform that I write on called Substack. Some of you may be familiar with Substack. And the most common search phrase that people type into Google in order to find the material that I present is the observer effect. There's a lot of interest in what that phrase refers to. Now, the observer effect can show up in psychology. You know, if people know they're being observed, you don't see the same thing that you would see if they didn't know they were being observed. It can show up in all kinds of different areas. It shows up in electrically, and when you do minute observations of the world. But the observer effect, as it's used, the phrase observer effect, when it's used in the culture, usually means that there's something that we're observing, something out there that we're observing, and when we observe it, it affects it, changes it. But now we're talking about observation being a creative force and not an interpretive force. So observer effect takes on a different meaning in that context. Modern physics strongly suggests that reality depends on observation. Well, what if the observer actually forms or creates that which is being observed instead of simply influencing it? This is the quantum mechanical view of the observer effect. So what's a human being? What does the phrase or the term human being point to? Traditionally, it's a physical body with add-ons like consciousness, feelings, and emotions. An alternative definition is that a human being is an individualized awareness containing experience. So you have being, you have self, you have body, and you have mind. Being is just, you can't define being in terms of anything else. Being just is. And a human being is an individualized aspect of being. And being and consciousness are the same thing. Being and awareness are the same thing. You know, if you do, religiously is the wrong word, but if you do consistently what this room is designed for, this is the meditation room, right? There's meditation cushions and all that. If you do that enough, and deliberately enough, and consistently enough, you can watch everything but your awareness fall away. You can be aware of your own awareness, but it's not this that's being aware of awareness. It's awareness being aware of awareness, and awareness being aware of this, which is a creation. I'm creating this in my brain. If I look in a mirror, there's electrical, there's optical data coming into my brain, and my brain is creating a picture of this. I have no way of determining if, and there's also, you know, electrical repulsion, which generates the feeling of doing this. We won't talk about the other senses, it's sort of a distraction. But, so a human being in this new point of view, in this point of view that I'm offering you, and remember, I'm not telling you it's true. I'm not telling you it's the right way of looking at the world. I'm offering it to you as an alternative to the way you have been trained by your culture to look at the world and yourself. A self is an individualized being. A body is the representation of self in physical form, And mind is essentially a perception processor. So you have the brain, which is making images, pictures out of electrical data, except it gets a little funny because the brain is also part of the picture that the brain is creating. This gets interesting. This gets hard to talk about. And then you have mind. And the mind's job is to take all of these pictures and compare them to all the other pictures that you got. And say, well, that worked in the past, so maybe if I do this in the present, because I'm comparing the present, the image in the present, except it's not really in the present. We don't notice the image that we have of the world until the experience that we're picturing is just past. We don't actually live in the present. We actually live in the past. Anytime you're thinking, you're going through pictures that have been stored in your brain or your mind. It gets hard to distinguish these words at this point. The worldview that I'm going to present, that I'm presenting tonight and in the next 3 Tuesdays, starts with the premise that there is no world out there, and that there is no out there, except as a way of imagining or visualizing or portraying. So, have any of you ever been to the planetarium? In a planetarium, you know, you sit in this comfy chair and you recline, and there's this huge dome over you, and all of the information about how the world, how the universe, the physical universe behaves is encoded in software in a machine. And that machine projects, like this projector does, on the dome, how the planets and comets and stars and the sun and the moon and all that stuff behaves. And it's a lot easier when you visualize it than it is if I tell you, well, these degrees of inclination and these degrees of this, and if I show it to you, if somebody shows it to you, it's much easier to grasp. Well, entertain the idea that that's what's going on here in this room. That being is showing you how life actually works, instead of telling you. Very rarely do we get told how life actually works. I got 7 words 50 years ago. Don't worry, Larry, we'll get you home. That's all I got. Everything else is experiential. Everything else is something that I tried to learn from the mistakes that I made, from the failures and the successes about how life works. And we have this world to play in. We have these bodies. You know, if you've ever played a game, a board game like Monopoly, you have to have a piece. Like you put your piece on the starting square, and you roll the dice, and it says 3, so you get to move 3 spaces, and you get the consequences of moving 3 spaces. So this is my piece on the board game of life, except it's not 2-dimensional like a board game. It's 3-dimensional, except that Mr. Einstein told us it's 4-dimensional, and because he said the reality is space-time, not space and time, which is very, very difficult to visualize. I can't do it. Maybe he could. Maybe he could visualize space-time. It's really interesting if you read this stuff, which I did, and sort of understood it a long time ago, that everything goes in a straight line in space-time, including the moon and the earth. Now we look at it and we say, no, it's not, it's a curved line, it goes around. Well, space-time curves. What makes space-time curve? Matter. That's what a gravitational field is. It's a warping of space-time. So I'll give you an example of that. You ever been on a trampoline? Okay, it's stretched really tight, looks flat. If you take a billiard ball and you roll it on the trampoline, it goes in a straight line. If you ignore friction and imperfections in the structure of the rubber or whatever that stuff is, it goes in a straight line. Now you take a bowling ball and you put it in the middle, and the trampoline goes like that. And now when you roll the billiard ball, it doesn't go in a straight line from your point of view. Why not? Because the bowling ball has warped the structure of the trampoline. Now that's a two-dimensional representation of what actually happens in 3 dimensions, or 4, by the presence of a massive object like this, like the sun. But from the perspective of space-time, the billiard ball actually moves in a straight line, and the Earth moves in a straight line. And what does that give you? Well, it gives you the ability to forget about something that is also really hard to understand, which is action at a distance. How does the sun reach out and hold on to the Earth? We know about attraction, gravitational attraction. How does it do that? How does it hold on to the Earth and cause it to go like that? And the answer is it doesn't. There's no force. There's just a warping of space-time. That's an example of a shift in our understanding. The idea that there's a force that's emanating from the sun that's holding on to the Earth is an illusion. It doesn't hold up under 20th century physics. You have to consider instead the warping of space-time. So physics can be, and this is a sort of a preview of what we'll do, I think it was in the 3rd session, a couple weeks from tonight, of how physics can help us visualize how our thinking is culturally derived and often wrong. And much of our thinking today in this technological day and age is also wrong. And we'll pursue that. A clue about that might be that we don't seem able to solve many of our problems, like impoverishment, like hunger, like war. And sometimes that's attributed to a lack of political will. I think it's actually attributable to that we live in an understanding of the world that's full of illusions. And if we were to clarify that, if we were to discover who we really are and what that world out there really is, we might not act that way. A good example of that might be the zero-sum game. Is everybody familiar with the zero-sum game? If I get more, you get less. Right? Because it always adds up to the same. In other words, the resource, whatever the resource is finite. It has a limit. So if I get more of it, you're going to get less. That's called a zero-sum game. But what if that resource is a picture in the brain? What if it's not really objective reality? Then where's the zero-sum game? And where's all the fighting about it? And where's all the arguing about that zero-sum game and who's entitled to more and who's entitled to less? If there is no limit to that resource. Well, if there's objective reality out there, there is a limit to the resource. But if the reality that we're talking about is a story, maybe there isn't a limitation to that resource. Maybe we don't have to fight over it. Just a thought. You can entertain that idea and see if it works for you.
Sounds good.
So, I'm going to bring this to the formal part of this to a conclusion. Our perception defines our world. Illusions, cultural, sensory, and cognitive, shape human experience. True freedom begins with questioning what we think we know about everything. The most powerful and liberating place you can come from is not knowing. Now, our culture places a premium on knowing. Knowledge base. Look at the way you were taught as a child. A whole bunch of stuff was crammed into your head, so to speak. I'm guessing. Unless you were homeschooled, but maybe it was the same story. I don't know. But that knowledge, that's information. Yes, there's the cultivating of critical thinking, but knowledge is a different thing. Real knowledge is a different thing. Knowing from your own experience that you're capable of having a joyful life no matter what, that's knowledge. That's operable knowledge that can't be taken away from you. So what happened to me 50 years ago is I was shown two things. One thing is what I referred to earlier, that the laws of physics always apply unless the universe wants to make a point. And then they can be, what's the word, abrogated or something like that? They can be temporarily put on a hold, which is what happened in the car. The second thing I found out that day is that consciousness, being, aware, conscious being, doesn't have to be encased in one of these. Because that voice that I heard was everywhere. I was contained inside that voice. It wasn't in a particular place. It didn't emanate from a mouth or any other physical thing. It was everywhere. It just is. That awareness, that consciousness, that source of all just is. You can't define it in terms of anything else and still retain the power that it has. I mean, that episode lasted maybe 3 seconds in terms of the voice that I heard, and a half an hour in terms of the way the car behaved thereafter. And that was 50 years ago, and it changed my whole life. It altered the trajectory of my life. It kicked me out of where I was and put me on a different path. That's power. That's real power. The power they talk about out there in the world, the power in Washington or the White House or wherever, that's not power, that's force. Power is a different thing. It comes from knowing. It comes from knowing so deep inside you that you're willing to alter the context and the trajectory of your life as a result. I had no choice but to do that. So how do you get out of the box? You know, we're often exhorted to think outside the box, but nobody ever tells us where the box is, or what the walls are made of, or how to get out of it. Well, I'm going to assert right now that the box is built out of your beliefs. And to the degree to which you are wedded to your beliefs, like I know the truth, that kind of wedded, you're in the box. Now the box may be very big and it may have lots of resources in it, but it's still a box. And there's an outside of the box. There's an outside of your belief system, like the fish that gets caught, gets pulled out of the ocean of belief. And now he knows about the ocean of belief, because it's down there and he's up here. It's now distinguished from everything else. It's distinguished from the background. What else is on your minds? Have you gotten a glimpse that maybe you have a worldview and that maybe it doesn't serve you as well as it might? Just a question to sit in. Yes, Fred?
I have a friend who believes that Trump hypnotized 77 million people and that's how he won last year's election. And I said to him, I tend to believe what I see, and I have never seen an example of mass hypnotism, so I can't go along with that. Am I being closed-minded?
You're choosing your story. That's what we do all the time. Your friend is choosing a story too. Your friend can probably live from your friend's point of view. I'm assuming a gender. Your friend can probably live from his point of view quite comfortably within that point of view. It's different from your point of view. It's different from my point of view, but it's a story. That's all he has. He doesn't have an objective reality that he compares his story to, that he can compare his story to. All he's got is his story, and that's all you got. That's all I got. That's all any of us have, or will ever have as humans, is our story. Now, if you get that, if you get to there, that all you will ever have is your story, then you might begin to grasp the power you have in your own life. Because if there's an objective reality out there that is composed of atoms and all that stuff, pretty hard to affect that. Pretty hard to change that, the way it shows up in your life. But if all you have is your story, that's a different story. Right? So no, you're not closed-minded, you're just choosing a story. Your friend exposed you to a different story, and you looked from inside that story on the viewing platform that I showed you, and you said, I don't think so. Right? And you went back to your story. But your story has illusions baked into it too.
Yeah, well, like you said, I would said I had never seen examples of that, and you're saying that what you see isn't necessarily the truth anyway.
What you see is an interpretation. It's a description. So next Tuesday, we're going to talk about common sense. We're going to talk about how common sense has evolved over the period of time that we're aware of. From it's common sense that horizon out there, I'm standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It's common sense that horizon out there is an edge.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way it was in the 14th century, or whenever. I might have my centuries wrong. But then some guys or gals, or probably guys in those days, got in boats and decided they'd sail around, and they noticed something really interesting. As they sailed around, the horizon moved too. Oh, it's not a real edge. It's not a real thing. It's a product of perception. It's not a real thing. And then about a century later, everybody knew that everything goes around the earth. You know, you lie out there after your chores are done on a hillside, and you look at the stars, and if you stay out there long enough, you can see everything going around the earth. It's natural. It's common sense. It's wrong from our perception now. We know that that's not what happens, but it was common sense, and everybody knew that. So what I'd like you to do, if you're going to come back next week, and I hope you will, is live in the question, at least part of the time, when you think of it, what are my illusions? What am I certain of? What's common sense to me? And then maybe we can look at whether that common sense is actually real.